issue of the SEC came on board. Now the SEC came on board to help structure regulation ecosystem. Now the one job of the SEC is to actually give a kind of a structured and kind of a structure when talking about regulation aspect, going into any form of regulation, what you need to do, what you don't need to do. So it gives a form of a structure when looking at the ecosystem and other, which is one important factor that we need to consider or that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem and other, which is one point that we're actually talking about here when talking about the ecosystem. So it gives a kind of now the SEC came on board to actually create their own. The SEC came on board and it actually came on board with some regulations that okay, before you do this, there should be some regulations or there should be some backing on ground that okay, yeah, I can actually go ahead to perform this tax. I can actually go ahead to perform the social tax and other, which is one important, which is very, very important that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are we building? How do we need to go about? What are the basic factors that we need to consider? What are the basic factors that we need to consider when looking at the ecosystem and also all these points here are actually very all these points we're actually talking about here are actually very important that we need to take are very very important that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are we building? How can we actually go about them? And that is very very important that we understand and we take note and we take cognizance of all those points when looking at the ecosystem and that all those points here are actually very very important. Now let's look at the parallel. Let's look at it in the parallel to crypto. Now, the stock market history parallels slightly regulates crypto markets. According to it's now a SATSI group, 80% of the initial coin offering ICO are scam. Now, 80% of this initial coin offering are actually scam. Now, why only 8% ever trade on an exchange and all that? Now, after at the same time, numerous crypto exchange has failed over the past years, resulting to millions of dollars losses. And that is why we have the issue of FTX, for example, and others which actually failed over. So now looking at what are we actually talking about now? Looking at it, relating it to the crypto ecosystem and other, you will notice that 80% of the initial coin offering are scam. Now we all know what initial coin offering is really all about. So 80% of the initial coin offering coming into the ecosystem are actually scam and all that. And why just only 8% of this 80% are even traded on an exchange. Now they just use that initial coin offering to just generate funds, to just scam people of funds and all that, just pump and dump and all that in the market. Now, even though apart from all this, now looking at exchange, for example, looking at platform for examples. Now, because our platform we're currently using, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of security backup when looking at it, there's acceptability, we have trust in the ecosystem. That's why we're actually making use about looking at the likes of FTS and Genesis. A lot of them actually went off with a lot of people actually lost their funds over the years when looking at it, maybe due to mismanagement of users' funds and others. Now, so all these are actually very, very important that we need to actually focus on, that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are these really all about? How can we actually go about? What are the basic information that we need to understand when looking at the ecosystem? As now, example of this, what are example of this parallel that we're actually now talking about? Now, the first one is initial coin offering. Now, the initial coin offering, that is ICO, lead to provide information for investors and promise unrealistic return. That is one point that we're actually talking about. Now, the first one is the ICO provide little information for investors and promise unrealistic return. That is one point that we need to, or that is one point that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem and all that. And predictably, many of these tokens explode, resulting in losses for investors and other, which is one important point that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem, when looking at what the blockchain ecosystem is really all about. Another, all these points are actually very, very important that we need to focus on, that we need to take note of when talking about the ecosystem and another. So the initial coin offering provide little information for investors and promise unrealistic return when looking at the ecosystem. That is one point. So What does initial coin offering do? It actually provides little investors for investors and promised owners. For example, now you are investing in a project, you don't know the people behind it and others, and it actually promised you that okay, come and invest in this project and you will get like 100% or 200 return of your investment. Now, what will actually generate that return? You don't know what is actually going to generate that return. They just say okay, come and invest in this project, is just coming on board and you will get huge amount. Now, without the project, without knowing the utility behind the project, without knowing the investor, without the that's what ICO do and others. Now, and also that is also some fake ICO. That's actually what they do and others. And unpredictably, many of these tokens explode, resulting to losses for investors. So, they actually now scale through because they actually tend to convince you that okay, if you invest in this project, this is the return you actually gain over a long period of time. This is what you start to gain over a long period of time, which will actually cause a lot of people losing a lot of funds in the ecosystem, which should not be so when looking at the ecosystem. And so all these points are actually very, very important that we need to understand, that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are the ecosystem really all about? How do we need to go about them? What are all this really about? What are the various factors that we need to consider when looking at the ecosystem? And that is very, very important that we understand all those factors. All those factors we're actually talking about are very, very important when talking about the ecosystem and all that. Another point that we'll be looking at is unregistered. Another point again is the unregistered exchange coming led customer fund with internal trading operation. Now, if trading losses occur, the exchange can no longer meet customer redemption, resulting to losses. This is also another way of customers of mismanagement of customer funds. Now, unregulated exchange. For example, if a platform, for example, is not regulated or it does not have some kind of regulations that they have to follow. There are some don't and do that they need to do. Okay, this thing we don't need to do this stuff we need to do it another. If we don't have that in place, you will notice that okay, there are going to be loss of funds in the ecosystem and other, which should not be so. And also, if trader loses or if trading losses could actually occur. The exchange could actually no longer meet redemption, resulting to loss of funds in the ecosystem and other, which should not be so when looking at the ecosystem, when looking at what they're actually building, what we need to take note of in the ecosystem, what are the various factors we need to consider when looking at the ecosystem and other. So all these points are actually very, very important that we need to actually understand, that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem and other. So stable coins sought to provide a stable source of valuable underpin exchange, leading to lending and also other activities. But many of these products fails to disclose the reserve backing, the reserve backing the coin, and leading to potential systematic losses or risks in the ecosystem or in the market space and others. So all these are actually very, very important that we need to take note of, that we need to focus on when looking at the ecosystem. What are they really all about? And so stable coins. So these actually are the three parallel lines when looking at the ecosystem and others. So these are the three parallel lines that we need to take note of when talking about example. Now, looking at the first one, we talked about the first one, which is the first one which we talked about is actually an initial coin offering. And when we talk about initial coin offering, what do we actually say? And you say initial coin offering actually provide little information. So just imagine coming into the ecosystem and you're just getting little information about what you're actually investing in. Will you still want to invest in that project? Now I'm just asking you. We use now just a project coming on board, and the funny part about it is that a lot of people still go ahead and go ahead to actually invest in project like that. I don't know why, but a lot of people still go ahead to invest in it because they believe. I don't know why they still believe that. Okay, this is because you don't really know what the project is actually really all about. You don't know what they're actually building. We're looking at the project. We're looking at all this, and we still go ahead to actually invest in those kind of projects, which should not be so when looking at the ecosystem and also all this. So we need to be aware of what we're actually investing in, what the project is is actually really all about, what the project actually has to offer in the ecosystem before going ahead to actually invest in that place. We need to understand. That is why the first one is the parallel line. That is the first point that we need to actually consider, that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. And also another point also is unregulated exchange, common led to customer funds with internet trading operation. That is also another point that we need. So now, if for example, if a platform, for example, that means you need, that means before you actually, that is why I actually advise everyone always make use of this platform that we're currently using, for example. Now, because if you don't do so, you are likely going to, now if you use any kind of, so for example, a platform came on board today and you went ahead to actually make use of it for your trading, and you deposit your funds there. You say, okay, I want to be saving my funds on this platform and all that. And overnight, the funds that you're actually trying to save on your platform actually got lost and all that. Now, what now you will notice that, what will you notice in that market? One point that you will actually notice on one point that you actually notice is that now the funds that you're actually using, it might get lost because okay, they might say, okay, we want to use your funds to actually trade on, and because of lack of regulations, they tend to misuse your funds when looking at the ecosystem, which is one point that we this is which is one point that we need to be careful of when looking at the ecosystem, when looking at what are they really all about, how do we need to go up, what are the basic various factors we need to consider when looking at the ecosystem, and other all these points here are actually very, very important that we need to consider, that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem, what are we building and other. And also the third one is stable coins sort to provide a stable source of value, underpin exchange, lending, and also other activities. But many, but also apart from this, but many of these products fails to disclose the reserve backing of their coin, leading to potential systematic risks. Now, that is why most platforms, most exchange, for example, they will actually tell you that okay, you have to give a kind of a reserve. What do you have what do you have on your reserve? What is your reserve backing and all that? And that reserve backing is actually one important point that we need. And you knowing your reserve backing, gives you control aware. You have been aware that okay, this is what I need to do. This is the kind of funds I'm actually taking care of. This is how I need to be careful not to mismanage the ecosystem. What are they really all about? And all these points I'm actually giving out are actually very, very important, and we are very, very important when looking at the ecosystem and stable coin, and looking at stable coin now failing to form of reserve backing now actually coming as expected. Market is going sideways, or when the market, that is very, very important, that it's actually very, very important that we need to consider, we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are they really all about? How can we actually go up? What are the various factors we need to consider about, that we need to take note of? And also there are no other shortage for specific. Now, so let me give you guys from some specific examples. Customer deposit, with it's a lot of people when because I huge amount of money go that way. It should not actually be so. Factors are monitoring the ecosystem. There's nobody actually monitoring the loss of funds that we actually had. This same day really all about what we need to take note of the ecosystem. What are the various factors to the cause to this in the clarification whatsoever we of course of today's session. Please and please, if you have any question whatsoever, if you need any clarification, you can do it by asking on the chat box, in which justice is going to be done as we keep moving ahead in the front when looking at the ecosystem. And also another point, another second example is the Tara. The Terra also the Luna, for example. Now Luna made misleading statements to build a trust, in building trust before causing devastated loss in the ecosystem and others. That is actually one point that actually came on board when looking at the market, when looking at the market space and other. And also we have BlockFi now. BlockFi, Consensus, Genesis, and other firms exploit an effect in the market when looking at that's why it is very, very important that we do our diligent research before going into any project, before that we must consider before going into the ecosystem, before investing in whatsoever, no matter what the project might be. And that is very, very important that we do our own personal research to know, okay, this is what this project is actually really about. This how I can actually go into this project to actually invest in another. We have genesis, we have past losses, and because they are because of lack of actually go ahead to actually lose a lot of people actually to lose their money because of why lack of what they're actually building and so all the SEC is new to applying wants to regulate exchange that exchange have service arising from common leading these services when looking at the ecosystem and which is one important factor that we must consider when looking at the ecosystem and this point is actually very important. And also another point that we also have is now the next point we're looking at is how to improve confidence, how to improve improving cost invest platforms have actually lost a lot of people have actually lost their funds in the ecosystem trying to invest but it's being lost and other. But apart from all this, now how do we actually now improve the ecosystem and others? So how do we actually improve this confidence in the ecosystem and others? Now, one regulation could actually the risks of associated with the regulation actually has a kind of this project, this is what this project is. Regulation actually has a kind of at one point is actually investors' confidence. That is why do you actually keep your money except if you are trading and you are sure that okay this market will go up or you are using spot trading and all that. But on a normal now the reason why you keep your money there is that okay you can sleep and you know that okay oh it's not that today you will see USDT at this social price tomorrow in the ecosystem. For example, I have my funds. I can come to a platform and deposit my and keep my funds there and order to save my funds there. If I don't have trust in the ecosystem, if I don't have trust in the ecosystem that you're actually making use of, so that when looking at the ecosystem and all this when looking at the ecosystem, when improve investor confidence, who can disclose the risks associated with their business when looking at the ecosystem and all that. Now you look at this for example, you can see some country looking at the market space and all that. So now, okay, around the world approach cryptocurrency approach Canada is quietly slight exchange regulated. Crypto exchanges are actually regulated in Canada. They actually have ICOs. The ICOs, that is initial coin offering, are actually regulated. Upcoming regulations, they actually have European Union crypto exchanges that we're going talking about regulations is regulations and others So regulated and other which other regulated ICU is actually upcoming legislation when looking at regulated important point that we need to understand and this is how it's very important that we understand about how can we actually go about them and so after all stock investors to worry about never have to worry that the broad stock is misleading their funds by trading on their own behalf or simply pocketing it. Meanwhile, they have an easy access to treasury trove of information about most stock in the SEC filing. Now, and content of their of to be accurate and all that. This regulation in place invites that behind the ICO offering is actually a critical before leaving investors reserve to from a failure of wide use stablecoin. Could help protect borrowing and lending from other scams or losses in the ecosystem, which is one important factor that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are they really all about? How can we actually go about them? What are the various factors we need to consider when looking at regulations in the ecosystem? And it is very important that we understand all those factors that we're actually talking about when looking at the ecosystem and other. So what other point that is actually very important? So regulation, we all know that regulation, looking at the SEC coming on board to have a form of ecosystem and which is one important thing that all these points are actually very need to take note of them. And, okay, what are the potential impact? Now looking at all this, what are now the potential impact for growth? Now looking at all this that we're actually talking about, it actually has a potential impact on growth. Now what are these little that the lack of regulation may be approach when it could actually demonstrate the ecosystem what they actually really are really all about and all. So at the same time, intense competition has kept costs low and also innovation rolling when looking at the ecosystem. What are the example of smaller projects, entrepreneur and regulation agency responsible for actually very important. Now, moreover, regulator conventional we build on conventional financial assets and also services could stream innovation And also, although by making some novel approach legal, for example, lending rule may focus beyond know your customer requirement, and also requirements know your customers for privacy and efficiency in the ecosystem. So all these points we're actually talking about are actually very, very important that we need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem. And so now the striking the right now, how can go about it, what are the various points we need to know in the ecosystem. And so how do we now strike the right balance? Because striking the right balance is also very, very important when looking at the ecosystem. Striking the right balance is also very, very important that we need to take note of when looking at the so striking the right balance, okay, this is how you actually strike the right balance. This is what you need to do, and it's actually a very one important factor that we must consider when looking at the cryptocurrency. To take note of when looking at the ecosystem. What are the various factors we need to consider when looking at the ecosystem, and it's very, very important that we take note of all these points. All these points here are actually important that we understand. Encouraging innovation from entering into the market and inhabit innovation. After regulation requirements may lead to greater overall idea and concept rather than points that we need to take note. On the other hand, a failure to regulate a crypto market could lead to these technologies never reaching the mainstream. Now, it's born into the crypto assets with a kind of a proper disclosure and protection, and customer bond by the ICO scam when to come at the ecosystem have to provide clear rules to align with the crypto market. This crypt this crypto project must find its way to improve disclosure, prevent conflict of interest, and also protect investors and customers, as well as know, and also very, very important, are actually very important at the ecosystem, and all the system and all is very, very important. We need to take note of when looking at the ecosystem and others. Also, what other point now? What next? What is now the next action line in the market space? Security and regulation in crypto. There's this underlying. That's what I'm actually talking about. Now, most crypto industry are actually now taking some kind of regulation approach to actually setback in the bid to apply security law to security. Markets actually in regulations, a lot of ideas coming on board in the ecosystem, which is actually one important factor that we need to consider, that we need to take note of when looking at the cryptocurrency ecosystem, what we need to know about it. We'll be talking about in today's section. I believe you guys have gained a lot from what we're actually talking about in the course of today's session. We'll be live again tomorrow for another interesting conversation where we'll come together tomorrow to learn more about the market space. What is a market really all about? How can we actually take control of the market? What are the various factors we need to consider? And